Very good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to today's uLaw webinar. The topic for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management. This particular webinar has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. Once again, I repeat that today's webinar on Law Office Client Management has been accredited for 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, New Brunswick, and British Columbia. You would take the title Law Office Client Management, plug that into your respective Law Society portals, and you should be able to take up that 1 hour of CPD credits. As always, please use the chat window to ask any questions that you may have pertaining to today's webinar. Both me and my support staff would be more than happy to answer your questions. Okay, let's get started. Like every other uLaw webinar, our webinar today has a specific agenda. We're going to talk about one of the most important first touchpoint transactions within a legal or a law office, primarily the client intake process. We're going to talk about the compliance aspects of a client intake process. And you would think, where does compliance come in from me just taking information about my prospective client or a new client? But there are many of these compliances that we would like to bring to your awareness, and we'll talk about those. And of course, from an overall practice management standpoint, we would love for you to have a better appreciation of how best you can group or categorize your clients, prospective clients, ghost clients, as well as clients respective to the types of roles that they play within, let's say, a matter, that are better utilized across court forms, conflict checks, so on and so forth. So group management or managing your clients based on a certain categorization, we're going to talk about that. One of the first important steps that the Law Society talks about for you to do as soon as you've entered a client information is managing conflict checks, really understanding if there are any conflicts in representing an individual or a specific client that you've just done a client intake for, making sure that you've done your due diligence, which is scanning through the database of all your clients that you've worked with in the past, and making a clear judgment with information about that conflict. Now, sometimes there are situations that we've seen where you may have a conflict and you're completely aware, but there may be the special reason or condition that's very specific that you are able to articulate, in which case the Law Society does give you the room to explain about that specific situation, around that conflict check, how you still have deemed moving forward with that client's matter despite the conflict. But those are some of those rare situations. Situations where there is a conflict and you're unable to represent that prospective client, the Law Society clearly articulates the need for a non-engagement letter to kind of bring a logical closure to that quick relationship that you just set up. Okay? So we're going to definitely highlight the importance of handling conflict checks and non-engagement letters as you deem fit. Specific Law Society requirements after you've done that client intake, including your client ID verification, really understanding how have you or your law firm determined that this individual or company is truly who they claim to be, whether that's a driver's license, passport copies, whatever form of ID verification that your firm requires, ensuring that there's a complete document trail or audit trail of all the documents that you've collected. And as part of the compliance, there is a client ID verification document where you can clearly outline the set of documents that you did take as part of that. As you progress further within the matter for that specific client, which still becomes part of that client management, we then talk about getting into a very thorough, comprehensive retainer letter or an engagement letter, if you were to call it, and ensuring that the conversations that you have with your client pertaining to the overall engagement is clear, straightforward, and allows it for a mutually beneficial relationship for both your firm as well as for your client, with limited friction, if you will, and a faster, easier understanding of the roles and responsibilities of both parties involved as part of this legal agreement. Okay? As part of your client intake process, there's this very unique situation where you have the opportunity to either ask or find out more about how this particular client got to know your legal firm. So as part of every business, everyone's really curious about how did my marketing work? Where did you learn about my business from? Was this Google? Was this some online presence? Was this a social media presence that I had? Or was it a word of mouth, client referral, etc., right? So the source of contact is that simple field that you're able to fill out when you do that client intake that not only allows you and your firm to have a better appreciation for the channels through which you're getting recognized and you're getting clients from, but also is a compliance document that you can present if and when asked for, because sometimes the auditors may want to make sure that you're not just a referral firm, that you're actually a legal firm doing legal work. Okay? So source of contacts, a very important document for you to keep in mind. For those who just joined, the topic for today's webinar is Law Office Client Management. Importing and exporting client information, whether you're migrating from one system to another, ensuring that you have a plan, either talking to your vendor or if you're using any homegrown systems, making sure that you have the flexibility to not only import information, but making it easy for you to export information from your current system of record. A very important aspect of your business that you should keep in mind, right? Because it makes it easier for you to make that transition if and when that is required. Contact analytics and feebook. So this goes one step further. Once you've done that intake process, once you've done a certain amount of work for that matter, and you started to see money flow in and out, having a system or a process that allows you to derive analytics out of each and every touch point with that client gives you a better perspective for not only follow-ups, but also understanding the types of clients that you should and shouldn't necessarily deal with, given the opportunity, right? So if you find that a certain type of client, for example, is not paying you on time, it could be a combination of a type of a client combined with the nature or the scope of the matter itself, the area of practice. So combining data that you capture as you transact and as you work with these clients should enable and empower your law firm to make better business decisions as you move forward. Okay? Alrighty, so that being said, hopefully I've set the agenda and I've set what you should expect over the next 35 to 40 minutes. We'll start with the client intake process. Now, each and every law firm is very different in how they go about doing this particular process, right? It really depends on the maturity of your systems of records. It really depends on the types of practices. It depends on how many people there are in the law firm. So there are many different reasons that can determine how you go about capturing this information. So you could have a simple Word document that you present to your prospective client. There could be a sophisticated web form that's on your website that automates the whole intake process. There could be a phone call away where someone dials your specific phone number and you're readily available to intake that information going back to even old school ways of faxing information. So there's many different ways that a law firm or a legal firm can capture this client intake. But it's a very important step for you to consider, and there are certain nuances to how best and the types of pieces of information that you want to capture, regardless how you capture it. Right? One of the first steps that the Law Society most certainly talks about is, as part of your professional obligation, and this is a webinar that we ran earlier this year, there are many different steps, right from client intake to file management to financial management to many other aspects of you being a legal practitioner, right? As part of that client intake service and communication obligation, the Law Society talks about how important it is to capture in much detail as possible about that initial phone call or that first contact that you have with a prospective client. As a legal firm, you have this important obligation of documenting or recording that initial call, consultation, whatever that first touch point may be. Please, the next step would review internally ensuring go forward accurate in matter. Of course, subject check, of course, tools based on the first thing then work with the world or set the world enough those work as a practitioner and data to you not based on the information that you need. But to do so, you certainly need the pieces of information. Perfect. Nothing as it. Phone first, correspondence on the way. If you have multiple phones, and the more information on your the content nature. And that's one there is information you get more learn. Also, if you are concerned if you have no study in client information, when further being for 30 the new customer this whole process or like calendar person your email calendar, your and on the website or the page call Very good afternoon. I do apologize. I hope you're able to hear me okay now. Please to use the chat window to let me know if my voice is better. If not, I'm going to have to try a different phone. Okay. Awesome. Hopefully we can continue down this path. So as I was saying around the conflict check itself, the client intake process and the fields that you capture within that intake really helps you make a more holistic approach to capturing the conflict search. And we were talking about modern ways in which legal practitioners and law firms are beginning to intake client data that serves them in many different ways. First and foremost, it allows your legal firm to almost validate the information that's coming in. So you could use client intake forms that are integrated, for example, with Google addresses, or you may have Canada Post address validator included in these client intake forms. If this isn't something that you're doing today, maybe something that you can explore using. And the reason for that is these address validations ensure the quality of data that you're receiving from your client, also ensures that you're not receiving any junk data, because addresses and the right information go a long way in ensuring the quality of your client intake process, also really passing that information around to your practice management system to do a thorough conflict check. Okay. Now let's assume as part of that client intake process, you may then require, and we were talking about calendaring system that makes it easier for a prospective client, for example, to schedule a quick 30-minute phone call, and you can set up your availability on these different calendar systems that you make available. If we start to see, to make that whole quality of data that much better, law firms have started to also enforce the need, for example, to require prospective clients even to email or upload, let's say, a driver's license or specific documents that may be required to make that intake process more prudent. So this is yet another way in which you as a legal firm or a law office can really help yourself improve the quality of the data that's coming in, because all of this goes back to making that conflict check better. Assuming you've done all of these right things, and you've done the right moves, or let's say you go the old school way of receiving a phone call, you ask them for all this information, you've done your due diligence, determined that there are no conflicts. If there are conflicts, of course, we'll go to this last step, which is really, as I mentioned earlier, a very important step to safeguard yourself and also to ensure that the correspondence is clear to your client about your roles and responsibilities. So if you have determined as a legal firm that for whatever reason there's a conflict and you cannot represent this client, right away send them a non-engagement letter that clearly articulates that you as a legal firm are no longer responsible for that particular matter or scope of matter that that prospective client was bringing to your attention, right? Because you don't want to leave the client assuming that you are still responsible for that matter. Many times it leads to confusion. Sometimes the client may even come back to you saying that they were not clear about the roles and responsibilities. So if you've done your conflict check, if it is a conflict and you feel that it's not right to move forward with that particular client intake or move next to the matter stage, please do have a process, whether it's automated, semi-automated, or manual, to send a client a non-engagement letter. If there are no conflicts and you feel very comfortable moving forward to the next stage, then as part of that overall client management responsibility that you have, one of the obligations or one of the aspects of the obligation that the Law Society talks about is making it very clear, concise, and they stress upon the word clear. to make it very clear to your customer or your client about the obligations that both they have and the obligations that you bring to the table as part of that retainer letter or an engagement letter, however you like to call it, the financial responsibilities, the communication responsibilities, so on and so forth. Makes it easier, faster for both you and your client to make decisions. Okay. Again, I do find that some of our friends on the webinar aren't able to hear me. I would sincerely appreciate if you could let me know if you're able to hear me okay. I am using another phone and I seem to be able to hear my voice just fine. As I mentioned, if this is regarding the internet speed sometimes on your device, you are able to dial in into a phone. So if you can please put a thumbs up or some way of telling me that my voice is fine, I would greatly appreciate it. Otherwise, I'm just going to be talking away. No one's going to be able to hear me. All right, moving along and assuming you can still hear me okay. Clarity of that retainer and engagement letter. The financial aspect, very important category or component of that retainer or engagement letter. Often, clients come back. There's always a dispute when the collateral for fees or the actual fee structure, the responsibilities around retainer top-ups aren't clearly articulated, or isn't, straightforward enough in a document for a common person to understand. Okay? They shouldn't need to hire another legal practitioner to read your retainer letter. You know what I'm saying? So if you have your current templates for client intake, and if it's working, fantastic. Continue to see if you can improve upon how easy it is for your clients to provide that information back to you, making it digitally available if possible, making lesser steps for them to send you that information, makes it better for your overall brand and user experience of working with your legal firm. If you find areas that you can improve, there are opportunities either to talk to colleagues in the industry. There is enough information on the World Wide Web for you to review. And practice management software such as uLaw do provide you with templates for you to consider. There are other softwares that should provide you with those similar templates for you to consider, especially when it comes down to repeatability within that same area of practice, right? Making it easier for you to maybe get almost 60 to 70% of the standard text right, with another 30 to 40% that you need to tweak based on, of course, each and every situation. From a financial responsibility, please be clear in your letters about the retainer, if there is one. Sometimes being clear about how you accept these retainers. If there are certain modes of payment that you do not accept it in, then be very clear about that. Talk about, and this is another aspect that the Law Society talks about, which is be honest and clear in your expectation from your client or your prospective client when it comes to paying you money. So if they haven't signed this agreement and have not paid you a retainer within 15 days of this conversation, then, maybe this agreement is null and void. Whatever that timeline may be, sometimes providing a timeline also helps you in a business situation to get a confirmation from these prospective clients. Because unless they sign and move forward, then many times you as a legal firm are waiting for them to take that next step, to confirm whether they're really a prospective client, whether they're serious about this, or they're just flirting with the idea of engaging you as a legal firm, right? Sometimes putting a timeline around payments, putting a timeline around non-payments makes it very important for you to validate those clients. And last but not the least, providing receipts for any payment that you receive, whether it's a retainer receipt, whether that's a payment receipt that's going into your general account, a very important obligation as part of that client management process. Okay, so quick snapshot, find newer, faster, better ways to take information into your system, find better ways to validate the data that's coming into that client intake form so that it can be passed along to your conflict check. Make it very clear, concise about the obligations that you have when it comes to engaging with the client. And if you've deemed that there is a conflict and you cannot move forward, please feel free to make it certainly a point to send your client or their prospective client a non-engagement letter with the reasons there. Again, as part of that client management, part of that user experience, client experience, I'm going to skip through this real fast. But again, talking about the nature and scope of matter, to considering all the risks associated with the modes of correspondence, the modes of payment. Very important for your legal firm to articulate that in that initial engagement or retainer letter. Okay. Of course, this is a webinar that is being recorded and will be available to you on our YouTube channel. You can take a quick snapshot of this. But here are some of the compliance documents that we would love for you to keep in mind that you may be required to present as part of your audit. Okay? Of course, many auditors and many of the audits are very specific and sometimes a little bit more deeper dive into the financial aspects of your compliances. And once that's done through, many law society audits do ask for these client intake compliance documents. First and foremost, we spoke about this earlier, ensuring that there is a client ID verification document. Okay, this is a law society document, and we'll go through that real quick as I move into a demo situation that really outlines the steps that you have taken to identify this client. We spoke about driver's license, etc. The steps you have taken to ensure that this is truly the client that you're dealing with. The client intake form that supports that with the information provided, whether you've captured it manually, entered it into your system, whether it's an email, whether it's a web form, or if it's a phone call. Doesn't matter, ensuring that there's a form that takes that information into your system. Copies of retainer letters, sometimes, again, going back to ensuring that there's clarity of thought in that letter. Auditors may often ask you for a template of your current retainer letter. And this may vary based on the nature and scope of matter, the type of engagement that you deal with, and so on and so forth. Because so each and every area of practice may otherwise then require you to have its own template. You may have small claims matter with retainer, without retainer. You may have a landlord and tenant board matter with and without, a family, a criminal. There's different areas of expertise. You may have a third-party contractor or third-party practitioners involved. There could be many different situations that need to be clearly articulated in a retainer letter. So one of the things that you should certainly expect is that the auditors would do ask for those templates. Sometimes we do understand from our clients who've gone through an audit that auditors do sometimes ask for retainer receipt. Make sure that you're complying with that and you are making that as a part of your process. And of course, retainer receipts are better validated based on the date that you received the retainer and when you actually provided that receipt, because the retainer receipts do need to be dated. And there are certain data components as part of that retainer letter receipt, or retainer receipt rather, that is required. So right from the date that you provided that receipt, how did you receive that retainer to begin with, the amount, the reason for it. So often that retainer receipt should have the matter or a file number or some context to why that retainer was received. A signature, and it would be in your best interest to ensure that you get a counter signature from your client back so that both of you have that copy. Pretty straightforward, standard process in many business practices, and very important from a retainer standpoint to document all of that in that receipt. Conflict check, of course, the auditors would ask you for a random file. Tell me what's the conflict check form or a document that outlines why you determined to move forward creating this file with this client. So that's when it's important now that you've delivered that conflict check, because that would go back, because these conflict checks are dated. So it would be in your best interest to have those conflict check documents done then and then, as soon as you've done that client intake or closer to when you did that client intake, rather than wait for when the auditor shows up. Okay? And again, this is another item that we got feedback from our clients and have hence introduced this as a report into that compliance set of documents, which is the source of contact. Okay, which of course is a great marketing tool. That's one of the things we talk about often. Great marketing tool because it tells you where you're getting your leads or your clients from, but also from an audit perspective, it tells the auditors that it's not just a single source of that contact. There are multiple sources of contact. Okay? Non-engagement letters, we spoke about that to both ghost clients as well as clients that have a conflict. And ghost clients are, of course, are those prospective clients that give you a call, flirt with the idea of wanting to engage with you, maybe give you a lot of information about themselves, the situation. There could be instances where you send them a retainer letter and they never follow back, in which case, as I mentioned, you do need an exit clause within that retainer letter which says, hey, if you've not responded back with a signed document and a retainer amount within the next 15 days, then here's my exit clause. Sending them a non-engagement letter after that makes sense. Or if they've not even moved past that stage, they just give you some information. They say, hey, how much is it going to cost for me to take up this matter with my neighbor? And then give you some information. This is my name, a phone number. You're still obligated, unfortunately, as a legal practitioner, to respond back to them with a non-engagement letter. And that's why it's important that when anyone does give you a call, even for that initial consult, that you take as much as information as you need to determine the conflicts, but also be able to correspond back with those non-engagement letters. Okay. Another set of documents, and this is pretty new in terms of how this information is being asked for. And again, there are certain types of matters and the areas of practice that might determine these. Now, if you have an ongoing matter with a client, and that's, let's say, a criminal matter that's ongoing, could be a corporate matter that's ongoing, and the Law Society does ask if you have some method or means of ongoing correspondence, of continual dialogue with your clients, and how do you go about doing that? And some recommendations made by the Law Society include quarterly updates to clients with statement of activities, which really outlines what's happened in the last 3 months, financially, from a financial standpoint, money coming in, money leaving, the work put in by the firm. Sometimes, depending on the type of client that you're dealing with, you may even be required to provide a bill of cost. What we've done at uLaw is we've pretty much amalgamated these documents. We have these documents individually done, but our statement of activity pretty much combines all the information required to make it clear and concise to send your prospective and current clients. If you have a matter that's open and it's ongoing for over a year, which sometimes can happen, then a statement of accounts along with the statement of activity would really help, because that's going to really provide a lot of insight into what's happening, so that you as a legal firm are able to keep up the professionalism that's expected out of you to send your client proactively all of the information that they may need to understand where they stand, especially if it's an ongoing matter and it's been happening for over a year. Now, for matters that are closed, and depending on the tenure, some matters may happen really fast, regardless, like how you have a non-engagement letter that follows right away when the conflict has been determined. Ideally, you would have a closure statement, or what's called a final statement or a settlement of accounts that follows once that matter is closed. So let's say the retainer was provided, you've done your invoices, you've got your payments, you've provided all of those receipts to your client. How do you bring a logical closure to that relationship that you have with that matter, or that file, or with that client? All part of that client management. And I say that it's a logical closure to the matter or file because you may have multiple files for the same client, and they may have its own term. So it's important that you bring a closure, logical closure to that matter or file by either a final statement document or a settlement statement that clearly states, with this document, with all of this added information provided, your legal firm has completed its obligation, and it's after this, thank you for your business, but then this matter is done, and you move forward. Okay, so again, quickly reiterating, as part of that client management process, as part of that, every step of brand, user, customer experience that you provide that client, it is important not only for your own benefit, but also for the benefit of your client, that you present various data forms, various data components that you capture along the way, right from that initial client intake process to the final closure statement that you provide a successful customer. So please do take a quick look at your current processes. Take a look at all the documents that you have. If you are in line for an audit, maybe these are some of the things that you may want to consider. If you've had an audit and you've already got feedback, of course, always room for improvement, for continual improvement. As part of that client management, we briefly touched upon the types of documents that you present, especially to those ongoing matters that have a much longer life cycle. As part of how often do you touch base with your client in such situations where matters are ongoing for a longer term, the Law Society has a certain guidelines. These are guidelines for you to review and think about. And of course, they leave it to the individual legal firm to better articulate these correspondences, but these are just guidelines for you to keep in mind. So at least a quarterly review with the client, so especially if that matter is open, and documenting that review call, whether it's a phone call, whether that's an email, whether that's those documents we discussed. So having a statement of activity or even a settlement statement, if you're going to be sending that to your client, ensure that it's well documented, that there's proof that you've actually done that. If this is beyond the quarter, if it's, as I mentioned, going on for a year, then statement accounts of both the trust and general accounts, especially if there's trust involved, of course. You want to leave what the trust balance looks like, what the ledgers and journals look like for all accounts regarding that client. Now, in the interim, during an actual life cycle of the matter itself, how often you correspond with that client comes down to some of the operational steps that are needed to be taken, right? So if you have a situation where you're going to be sending invoices as and when either a disbursement or a docket has been docketed, then those are touch points. Those are how often you actually connect with your client. So every time there's a docket, if you think you have to send them an invoice, because that's what you've signed up in the retainer letter, then that's how often you touch with that client, whether it's electronic correspondence or otherwise, right? But four very important documents. And again, this is a big story, but I'll leave you with four important documents to keep in mind. Statement of activity or settlement accounts, bill of cost and its summary, and a final statement of settlement along with trust and general accounts. The top three documents. And the fourth would be a closure letter that is very articulated, that clearly talks about a logical closure to the matter. These would be the four documents that you probably should keep in mind to have in your arsenal or toolkit that you use to correspond on a continual basis with this customer. Of course, in addition to the invoices that you'll be sending them during the life cycle of the matter itself. All right, so then we move on to the next aspect of the client management, and this is interesting because it's, of course, mostly for your firm to have better visibility into the types of clients that you're dealing with, the types of clients and the areas of practices that they deal with, whether that's private clients, individual, corporate. This gives you the flexibility now to categorize these clients and associate data points to these categorizations. That now should hopefully help you better have an appreciation for the types of clients in your firm, types of clients that you want for your firm. So maybe there's this ideal client situation that you have, whatever that may be, whether that's revenue-based, whether that's short-term based, how long a matter runs for, areas of practice, right? An important way of also identifying a client is the role or the type of role that they play within a matter. So for example, are you dealing with plaintiffs? Are you dealing with defendants? So understanding the types of role that that individual client has in the context of the matter helps as well. And capturing that information helps not only for you to categorize them, but in some cases it may also help you automate data tasks for your practice management. Very important if you can find a mechanism or a process within your current systems to manage and categorize ghost clients separately. Because one, as I mentioned, they give you some information, they disappear, your obligation to send them that non-engagement letter, but unfortunately you also need to keep that information in your database and mark them as a ghost client. Because it's happened in the past where they may actually come back. They may have had a genuine reason why they were unable to engage with you at that point. They may always come back. And then, of course, you will determine as a legal firm if you want to move forward with engaging with that client or not. But it's important that you keep these ghost client contacts separately so that it's easier for you to promote them into a customer or just retain that information for conflict searches. Okay. And of course, last but not the least, having a better understanding of where these clients come from as part of that group management. One is, who are these clients? But from a marketing standpoint, it's important that you can capture where are these clients coming from, and if there's a certain pattern to how you're getting clients for a specific area of practice. That could be self-validated based on your own marketing initiatives. So if you're spending a lot of Google ads, or if you're spending a lot of money in certain types of advertisements that are region-based, whether you're spending a lot of time and effort in working with partners in certain areas of practices, the best way to validate the return on those investments is, of course, to capture this data as you do the client intake process. Capturing that source of contact, because that's really the validation for if your strategy is working, right? Of course, now we get into understanding conflict checks a little better. The main procedures involved, some of the data aspects of that conflict check. So the conflict check is an important aspect of that client intake process. It's done as soon as you've done that information recording, either part of that initial consultation or, as I mentioned, emails coming in, web forms. You take the first name, last name, the address, phone number, as much as information as you have, email addresses. And as part of that conflict screening document that the Law Society gives you as a guideline, it's important for you to capture in that form as to who within your firm is handling that call. This is important. So you really want to understand the prudence of that data and who has actually captured that data to begin with. Right? So who is handling that information? And the information, as I mentioned, such as address, definitely first name, last name, the address, phone number, and additional contact details, including email. Okay? I'll run through this form real quick once we get into a demo in about 2 minutes. But most certainly, as I mentioned, one of the most important aspects to keep in mind is if there is a conflict, identifying whether you're going to move on to the next step or not, whether you're passing this matter along to another representative, whether you're continuing to represent this client despite the conflict, in which case the Law Society does give you a little area to highlight and explain the reasons why you're doing that. And of course, if you're not going to engage with this client, articulating that as well, saying that you're not planning to move forward and you have declined, let's say, a retainer, as an example. So these 3 or 4 important pieces of information become critical in the data components of that conflict screening form. So now you've done all the good work of the client intake process, all of the Law Society compliance documents that are needed for you to manage your clients, take them and walk them through the life cycle of that matter to a point where you've done continual, meaningful correspondences at the right touch points, clear, concise invoices. You've done a logical closure to those clients. You've captured where they're coming from. All these data aspects of each and every transactions that you have with your clients should leave a certain trail of the characteristics involved of those clients, the characteristics and the nature of the work that you did for those clients, also appreciating your ideal client, because that's who you want to repeat for the success of your firm. Whether you use Excel sheets, whether it's in your mind, you're writing it down into a piece of paper, you're using software to help you with that. It would be nice to have a system or a process that allows you or gives you the information about your ideal client and your non-ideal client, because you don't want to repeat a mistake. Let's say you have a certain type of client that came through a certain type of channel for whom you did a certain type of job, and it was the worst experience that you had as a legal practitioner and a business owner. Maybe it sucked the life out of your work day. It did not result in that kind of revenue that you anticipated for the kind of effort that you put in. How do you measure and capture the essence of a good and a bad experience with the client? The broader term, business term, of course, is analytics. It's too broad, but what the analytics should provide you and what you should hopefully get out of it is an appreciation of the good and the bad experiences and the data to support that claim of both good and bad. So what do you determine as a good and a bad experience comes down to each and every firm. But if you've done that, it would be in your best interest to be able to have a certain profile of your client so that you can be very clear as to how you go after those ideal clients and stay away or have a red flag raised the next time a prospective client profile kind of matches your non-ideal client. If you're not doing this today, it's something that we recommend and something the Law Society also talks about. Instead of having to say yes to everybody, if you've had a bad experience, put that experience to use so that you don't have to face similar experiences moving forward. Information, including delay in payments, because that can really hurt your business. Maybe a really stand-up client, maybe came through a great referral, was a family referral, but you haven't dealt with these clients till now in such a business transaction relationship, right? And if you finally somehow find a great person, for whatever reason, when we dealt with this business, they never made their payments on time, then that's a profiling that you should do for yourself. Maybe going forward, don't stop from asking for a retainer. So learning from the analytics and the data that I can showcase to you helps you make, as always, we mentioned, good business decisions. It's always going to help you improve your life of being a business owner in this legal industry. And last but not the least, of course, understanding the source of contact and the source from where you're getting these ideal clients also encourages you to make the necessary investments needed to market your legal firm in those channels, because now you need validation. Let's say you spent $600 on Facebook ads. Was it really worth it? Are you going for leads, or are you just going for brand awareness? It's very important for you to determine what that investment looks like when you make one. As a legal firm, if you're looking for leads, then you need to be able to put your Facebook or whatever social media or whatever marketing expense that you have and compare it with the analytics that you're deriving out of your practice management or other systems that you use to manage these clients. Only when you put them side to side are you able to better appreciate the result of those investments. Or if you're not looking to capture it, then unfortunately what happens is you're just shooting in the dark, and you may want to just put all of this in a bucket called brand awareness. It's almost like putting an advertisement on television. It's pretty hard to really capture unless you have the right tools to how many people actually viewed it, right? And so yes, it's very important that you have a system or process, both manual and automated, whatever works. Automated, of course, reduces the amount of time that you need to spend, and it's available to you for very cost-effective prices today, and hence really makes a great business case to invest in automated tools to help you with these things. But even if you're doing this manually, ensure that you're doing it right, but it's going to help you make those faster business decisions. Okay. So with another 5 minutes remaining in the webinar, and I do apologize once again for the lack of, I think, audio that we lost for just a minute or so. And hopefully we didn't lose interest in doing that. So thank you for sticking around. I'm just going to walk you through real quick using uLaw as an example of what I've been talking about in terms of client intake, the whole 9 yards of compliance to closure. So let's assume we have a new client. Of course, in my previous demo, I'd shown how you can actually have your own client portal for each of the new clients, send them a link, have them input the information in a very secure manner, send them that link so that you get the data back in a secure manner. Okay, so if you know your client's email address or your prospective client's email address, you can enter that here, send them a separate link that they can send your information over. But let's do the old school way of entering specific information. I'm just going to say Mr. John or Jonathan. Okay. Let's say JS. Any notes if you like to take them. And here it is, the source of contact. So I'm going to say family. So maybe we ask Jonathan, hey, how did you know our legal firm? As to a family referral, and you can have your own set of fields that capture this, configuring this to your own liking, word of mouth, family referrals, however you want to call this. Okay, just going to say family. Of course, you can put in the notes if there's any additional information about that. You can say referred Uncle Bob. If you want to send Uncle Bob a gift card or a thank you, if this customer went through, it was a good customer to deal with, right? Correspondence address. Of course, there could be more than one, but only one of them would be ideally a mailing address to who correspondences are sent. You could have a home as well as a work. Phone number. And an email if you're able to capture that time. Simple client intake form. In this case, I've just assumed that I've entered it as I was on the phone, or maybe I received the email and I've entered it into my system. Okay. One of the first steps that you would do, as I mentioned earlier, is move on to creating the conflict screening to make sure that you're able to move to the next steps. Doing a conflict check report right away, checking for just first name, last name, or you can check if you've ever created a matter for such a person, if you've ever come across such a person. Maybe this person was a witness in a different matter, and you interviewed him or her. That could be a possibility. That could be data coming in as part of that conflict check. right? So based on that client conflict screening report, you would then determine if it makes sense to move forward to the next level or not. So for purposes of time, so let me open up that report. Now you can see the system gives you back information. You make the decision based on this. So there's quite a few Jonathans in the system that you've come across. In fact, you've had a few first and last names. You have quite a few John Smiths. And as per the Law Society requirement, this is date stamp. Okay. Let's assume you move forward with creating a matter. Family law. Now comes, again, whether you do it at that time or after the fact. Doing it as soon as you've done it, as close to you've done this, helps you stay more compliant. So client identity verification document. This is the document that the Law Society wants you to use to really say, all right, what's the first name, last name? What information did you capture for them to validate that this was Jonathan Smith? You got your driver's license or anything else. Okay? Who within your firm did they meet to provide that information? Let's done that conflict screening report. This is an important document that goes along with each and every client that you intake. Because this is the Law Society document that tells or allows you to tell the Law Society how you determined next steps. Okay, so is this a new client or is it a new matter for an existing client? This is a new client. What was the conflict search information? If there are conflicts, what steps have you taken? Right? Then you say whether it's possible conflict, conflict confirmed, or no conflicts. This is actually a Law Society template. We didn't create this. This is available to you in your bookkeeping guidelines of the Law Society across provinces in Canada. So having dealt with that, what happened next? Did you refer them to someone else? Did you decline a retainer? Okay. And this is how you are now able to put on paper what you did to confirm that this individual that you're dealing with now had no conflicts or had conflicts and you've dealt with it. Then comes the retainer letter and all the next steps that you have to take. Non-engagement letter. Of course, a great example of how you put a logical closure to say you did have a conflict. So here's a templatization, again, provided by the Law Society. What we've done is we've pre-populated data as and when you've captured it. Clear articulating that since we have not received any funds or any specific reason, we indicate that we're not responsible for any more legal service from our firm. We do not have any documents pertaining to you, and this is a logical closure to it. Okay? And last but not least, I want to show you the source of contact report. I'll probably call it a day with that. Right. Once again, do thank you for your patience in this regard. So let me show you the source of contact report. And I'll do this for this month. This document, again, as I said, gives you a good understanding. Of course, data in, data out. The quality of this report would be purely based on the quality of you inputting that information during that client intake process. If you remember, for Jonathan Smith, we had the source of contact as family. This is just an accumulation of all of that. So we know for the month of March, 50% of your clients came from family referral, the remaining 16% divided equally between friends, others, and your Facebook. Okay, and you can see there's almost 93 other clients or contacts, and we list them all for you. You can then make quick data updates. You can search up that name, Sajin or Samuel, and then go to their particular contact and update them. Okay? So wrapped up today's webinar. So once again, talking to you about the title of today's webinar, Law Office Client Management, giving you 1 hour of professionalism CPD credits in the provinces of Ontario, British Columbia, and New Brunswick. What we've covered is walking through that client intake process, the importance of it, the different ways in which you can do that, understanding the compliance set of documents that go behind that client intake process, the responsibility that you have as a legal practitioner or a firm to bring a logical closure both to a non-engagement ghost client, client with conflicts, but also bring a logical closure to a life cycle of a client that you worked with on a matter, and all of the documents that you then correspond with them on a timely, professional manner, right from the retainer engagement letter to the invoices to that closure letter along with statement of activities that you send them at the end of that matter. Doing the conflict checks, a first important step, deriving analytics around these clients, the last final step, so that you have a better understanding of your good and your bad profiled clients, so that you can make good business decisions to attract more of those happy client profiles. Okay? So thank you once again for joining me in this webinar. Look forward to seeing you at our next webinar next Friday at 2 p.m. Thank you.